useful idiots. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, cool. So we're going to talk to Roger Waters.
Hey, Matt.
How are you doing, Roger?
I'm doing
Thanks
well.
so much for doing this.
I see you've got shit all over your walls.
I do, yes.
All I have
quite a
is,
lot.
if you look over my shoulder, you can see the elephant in the room.
Oh, yeah, that's good.
It's very important. Super
That's
important.
really good.
That is an excellent joke. I like
It
that.
really is good. Yeah.
Thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah. So
You're very welcome. We're talking about Julian, are we? Or anything?
We can, yes. But in fact, that's a good place to start. You've been really outspoken about that. I actually saw you on the Tucker Carlson show talking about that.
First and last.
Yeah, I was gonna say, but the irony there is, like, if you want to talk about the Assange case on television in America, that's pretty much the only place you can go.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Right. So first of all, can you speak to what your reaction has been to the way the American news media has covered that story or not covered it? It's been really strange in the last year, especially.
Well, I've been completely unamazed.
Exactly. Right.
It's entirely what I would expect.
Right.
As we know, the mainstream media in the United States and in the rest of the American empire, which would include the UK, obviously, most of the EU, blah, blah, Australia, certainly, Canada, whatever. All the media in all of those places, they all carry something around in their back pocket, which they check. They go, can I talk about that? No. That's how it runs. And they're completely controlled by the ruling class, and that's all there is to it. So you just have to kind of get used to it. And stop writing editorials for the New York Times or the London Times or the Guardian.
You've paid kind of a pretty heavy price for talking about BDS, and also, I mean, you wrote a letter of support for Corbyn.
Oh yeah.
And it's been kind of amazing, like this the line of attack against progressive politicians like Corbyn, that they're anti-Semitic. I actually didn't see that coming because they didn't use it here against Sanders, but it was pretty effective, wasn't it? Or do you think it was?
Well, what, against Corbyn?
Yeah,
totally.
Yeah,
and this is a fight that's only just started.
Right.
I am in touch with a lot of activists in the United Kingdom, and we're going to fight back again. I am now involved in legal matters where I'm using what little cash I have. Well, I actually have quite a lot of cash, which is why I use some of it for things like this, to defend members of Jewish Voice for Labour. Okay, who, and there are three of them. There's one in particular whose name I can't remember, Melissa, somebody or other. I didn't know we were going to be talking about this, so I haven't got my notes. I'm very bad at names. Who is being sued by John Ware, who is the guy who directed the disgusting Panorama hatchet piece on, quote, anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, which is a total put-up job, plays fast and loose with any real information, but they're trying to crucify left-wing members of the Labour Party who wouldn't stand for it. The great tragedy of Jeremy Corbyn, wonderful man as he is that he didn't stand up and tell them to fuck off at the Labour Party conference in 2019. And he didn't. He somehow thought that appeasement was going to work. He went all Chamberlain with Adolf Hitler. I have in my hand a piece of paper signed by the German Chancellor. But we all know the scene. Well, Jeremy, bless him, somehow I think he thought that it will be all right. And it wasn't. They killed him. Stone dead, and it's talk about foreign governments interfering with elections. The Israeli lobby totally destroyed any chance of there being a fair election in England in 2019, but they actually did it, and the evidence is all there. And there have been a number of documentaries made about it, called The Lobby by Al Jazeera. There's two of them. There's one about England and one about... They're both kind of, it's so open and shut and there in your face all day, every day. But it's interesting that you say to me, the price I paid. I haven't paid any price. What price have I paid? I haven't paid a price. I'm still working. I've got a tour which we've rescheduled for next year. I'm working hard on that. When I go out, there's bums on seats everywhere. I make more than a decent living. And so far, and I'm touching wood furiously here, they haven't managed to shut me up.
Yeah. I mean, with the Corbyn aspect, it's interesting, Matt, you said that about Bernie. I mean, of course, Bernie being Jewish gets him the honor of, like I get this too, not to compare myself to Bernie, but if you're Jewish and you're critical of Israel, you're called a self-loathing Jew as opposed to an anti-Semite. So, but Corbyn didn't have that luxury. So he was full on, just savage.
Well, Bernie also, again, bless him, what's not to love about Bernie Sanders compared with all the others, at least. But he also is he's towing so many party lines. Yeah. He stood up behind Guaido in Venezuela when they attempted to destroy democracy in that country as well.
You mean he stood up?
I couldn't believe it. I was going, what are you doing? This is insane. But there we are.
Yeah.
Luckily, that great experiment, Bolivarian revolution in Venezuela, has resisted all the attempts by the American empire to destroy it and to destroy its people as well. Who for the first time in the last 400 years, or since the Spanish got to Central and South America, have had a chance, just a chance, to have a fair crack at the whip or a fair slice of the cake. And they're getting it as well. Will it survive? Who knows?
It actually goes to another question I wanted to ask you, because I've read before where you've talked about that you pay taxes in the United States. Yeah. Most of your taxes go to the Pentagon. Yeah. And that issue is just never part of our electoral discussion. We never talk about whether we should spend less or more, or whether we should be in other countries less, or doing, is that frustrating? As somebody who lives here,
of course. Enormously frustrating. My good friend in Melbourne, Australia, Caitlin Johnson, whose blog you must know, says almost nothing else. She says more or less the same thing day after day after day after day. Is there any chance of the American public waking up to the huge lie that it has been told, that it is somehow vulnerable to attack from outside, and in consequence needs to line the pockets of the very rich by giving anybody's tax dollars to Raytheon and all the other armaments companies, which gets funneled straight into the pockets of the trillionaires. That's what war is for, and the American people can't seem to get their minds around it, even though it's been quite obvious since Korea.
How would you say it compares the situation in the United States and in England in terms of the anti-war movement, or kind of an awareness of what the government is doing?
What is interesting is that the cabal, United States, UK, France, Belgium, Germany, whoever, the whole Australia, Canada, you always have to include them because they're extremely culpable in all of this, have such a tight grip on policy that what the man in the street says, as demonstrated on February the 14th, or whichever day it was, 2003, there can be 30 million of us in the streets all over the world explaining to these fuckers that what they're doing is criminal and insane and morally corrupt and completely wrong and can do nothing but incalculable harm for years and years and years to come. And G.W. Bush and Tony Blair and all the others went, we don't care. We don't care what you think. We couldn't give two ticks for what you think. Turns out you were right. You were completely right. All those millions and millions of people in the street. And what a sight. Not that I was there in any of the cities. I wasn't. I was probably on the road, doing something useful.
Right.
But it happened, and it's there as an example for everyone to see. They were right, you arseholes. You were wrong. The many got it completely right. You, the very few rich bastards who tell everybody what to do, got it completely wrong. And they will sit and look at me and say, no, we didn't. We made fortunes. We got it exactly right. We're making fortunes now. We don't give a shit about the pandemic or a few people dying in foreign, or lots, kill them all, so long as we're lining our pockets. That's all we care about, and it is. The weird thing is that they somehow keep this because they're so good at propaganda, they keep it from the, quote, voters. As we all know, America is not actually a democracy. The electoral system, apart from anything else, makes certain of that. And in the last few years, anyway, Citizens United was the final nail in the coffin. And now there's a 6-3 majority in the Supreme Court. You're going to see a lot more of that, of them deciding what the law is and telling everybody else. Oh, well, send it to the Supreme Court. They're bloody good at deciding what's right and what's wrong. No, they're not. They're terrible at it. So who knows whether America, the United States of America, might eventually, or the people might eventually cotton on to the truth that the country is not being organized for their benefit. They have no health service. They have virtually no welfare. They live in poverty. Most of them are in penury. People can work at full-time jobs, sometimes 2 full-time jobs, and still be living out of the trunk of an old car that they can't afford to get fixed. It's incredible. In the richest country in the world, I'm starting to rant.
You know, I thought one of the things that was the Bush years was interesting is that they figured out they didn't have to listen or worry about protesters anymore. They had these huge protests against the Iraq War, and they just kind of ignored them. Yep. There were artists who were organized. I mean, back in the 60s and 70s when Pink Floyd was coming up, people were afraid of what artists thought, right? Like they led anti-war movements. They were major forces in culture. Is that still true now? Like, or like the leaders?
I hope not. I hope that this new Black Lives Matter, post Ferguson, post George Floyd, or currently with George Floyd, that movement, that I hope that has struck enough of a chord that it won't go away. I realized halfway through this, and it's not halfway through, we're just at the beginning of this set of protests, that one shouldn't try and be non-violent about this. They're not. Why, if you're fighting a monster that is the most violent thing that certainly that any of us have ever experienced, the United States government and the United States policing of the towns that we live in, they are incredibly violent. You know, and we know that this is the most violent country in the world, not just because there are more guns than there are people, which is pretty weird, but because they get used on people. And so the rate of deaths from the police in the United States is, I think it's like 4 or 5 times the number per million or per 10 million or however they gauge it as the next, quote, civilized country. It's extraordinary. And yet people go, you know, you see these good old boys driving up and down. I'm out in the Hamptons, I admit it. Okay, I admit it.
This is a safe space. It's okay.
And, you know, you see the good old boys in their pickup trucks covered in Trump 2020 flags. Thank goodness that didn't come to fruition, you know, and thin blue line flags and Confederate flags or whatever, honking their horns, miles and miles and miles of them. So if there's one thing that Trump did, apart from be a buffoon and make everybody, you know, point and laugh, he made it acceptable to be a racist supremacist good old boy in a pickup truck, which shows us that it never went away. And that all the signing of legislation with LBJ at the end of the Vietnam War and whatever somehow never actually crept into what this country is. So I was reading Mark Lamont Hill's new book the other day, We Still Here, and it's a really good book. I would recommend it to anybody who hasn't looked at it, because he is meticulous in describing the situation from his perspective, which is different, certainly, than mine, because he's black and I'm white, and it's different. It's hard for us to quite comprehend the nature of what happens in this country that we live in. Anyway.
And he's great at connecting that to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Mark has been, obviously he's been very involved in that battle as well. But you will find that anybody who actually cares about justice cares about justice for everybody.
Yeah,
they really do. So I've just got involved in my backyard with the Shinnecock Nation.
Oh yeah, I saw that.
And we are just beginning, or they are just beginning. I'm just helping in every way that I can to engage New York State in a lawsuit that New York State has lost. Okay, so New York State sued the Shinnecock Nation to get them to tear down a monument. Well, they call it a monument. Everybody else would call it an advertising LED on the side of 27. The state sued these people for putting up an advertising hoarding on their land, on their reservation, that's protected by federal regulations. And the Shinnecock for the last 10 years have been recognized federally as a people and a sovereign people. So they go to court in Albany. I'm assuming this, but I'm pretty sure I'm right. In Albany. And the judge rules for the Shinnecocks. No, you can't make them take it down. No, you can't stop them building more if they want to. No, you can't do that, and you can't do that. So what do? What are they doing? They're going to appeal it, and then they'll appeal it again and again. What they're going to try and do is starve them out. It's exactly the same tactics. Another court case I'm involved with is representing people in Ecuador against Chevron Corporation. Oh, yeah. This has been going on for 20 years. And Chevron at the beginning said, we're not paying a penny. When they lost the case, they lost it. They owe $9.5 billion to 30,000 Ecuadorian rainforest dwellers. They won't give them a single cent. They just said no. And they've done everything that they can. And at the beginning, they said, we will fight this case till hell freezes over. And when that happens, we will fight it on the ice. Give me another. I'm pretty tough hombre. You know. Well,
that's what they said?
That's what Chevron said. Chevron, and I've said this to you often, I'm just an old bass player, but I'll be there on the ice. I'll be there. I'll fight you underwater when the ice is melted. You know, we're not going away. They've got our lead human rights lawyer in this subject. He's been under house arrest in New York. He's called Stephen Donziger for 500 days with an ankle bracelet. Can't go anywhere or doing. You know what? For a misdemeanor, for a contempt charge.
Like a contempt of court charge?
A criminal contempt of court charge, yeah.
Wow. So your counsel's been in an ankle bracelet for over a year because of a wild.
You know what for? Do you know what his crime is? They tried to get him to turn over his laptop and his cell phone that he's used all the way through his advocacy for the Ecuadorian rainforest people to Chevron. And he went, I can't do that. That breaks client privilege. That's against the law. Contempt of court. Take the prisoner down. I mean, can you believe it? Luckily, this is starting to dribble out into the legal community. And there are now some very hard and heavy hitting and extremely well-respected lawyers, like Marty Garbus is one of them, but there are many of them And they've now insisted on forming a committee to oversee the legal proceedings that are trying to send Stephen Donziger to jail for trying to stand up for human rights. But this is the country we're living in. That's why we have to be on the streets or wherever we can to fight back. We have to stand up and fight back and encourage one another across any barriers that there might be between progressive people. We have to ignore all of that and just stand together and help each other, because that's what community is, you know.
Yeah, well, how much are you worried about things like internet censorship, suppressing news about whether it's a case about Chevron or Israel-Palestine news? I mean, you've talked.
International Youth and Students for Social Equality.
Exactly. That's why there was a picture of me with a thing over my mouth with Twitter written on it. I'm hugely worried about it. These are appalling monopolies. And they have secret meetings in the Pentagon. And they're totally controlled by the government, whoever it is. It doesn't matter, because the government, whether it's Joe Biden or Donald Trump, they are following the same set of rules, and they have the same basic principles. They are going to maintain the grip of an extremely wealthy ruling class on this country and go on milking it for as long as they can, which, unless we, the people, stand up and say no, will be until it's all gone, because they're destroying it faster than it's possible for any of us to imagine. They're destroying the whole earth. And we all know that. You know it. We all know that. Everybody knows it. We've been being told it by wise people for at least the last 50 years. But they go, psh, we're not bothered about that. Let's just keep making money. All of them.
This group that was shut down, they're of course associated with the World, the World Socialist website, and that you're always covering the censorship that happens to them. That sometimes the left gets a little confused, I think, and thinks that the way you shut down like right wingers or racists is through content moderation, and as we try to point out on the show, that will wind up targeting socialists and Palestinians. The most misguided.
Absolutely. So on a piece of paper over there, I've got something that was an alternative to my thing with Twitter on it, which was said, liberate the internet, deconstruct Google, Facebook and Twitter. They're deeply, deeply dangerous monopolies. And they are becoming hugely more and more and more powerful. And Facebook's probably the most powerful engine on earth. And it's run by some prick who got his start by grading co-eds in a high school. That's where he's at. It's unbelievable that he should have any influence on any of it. And I don't know how it happened. I'm flabbergasted by it. I can't. But then I never had anything to do with any of them until a few years ago when I decided to go back on the road again. Oh, you've got to have a website. Why? Oh, because that's how people communicate with you. That's how people will know you're going on the road.
Right.
Oh, I thought you did it with radio. No, you do it like that. Oh, really? And so I started a website. I've got it now, rogerwaters.com. It's called. And it was like, for the first 6 months, it had like 2,000 people now, and now it's 2.6 million or something. So it's slowly become a large number of people, and it's sort of in the sights of the Israeli lobby trolls and other trolls, and white supremacist trolls as well. But is it dangerous? Yeah, it is. I sometimes have to ask myself, should you really be using Facebook at all? And it's always the same thing. You think, well, a one-man boycott is not going to do anything. If I could persuade the 300 million people who use Facebook, or however many it is, to all stop using it, I would. I absolutely would.
Was the wall, I always thought it was full of all this dystopian imagery and like and language and metaphor. I mean, do you think in this kind of like the tech world where we have all this global infrastructure that a lot of them, I don't know, you told me, because I think I got some of it wrong in terms of what that album was about, but it always felt to me that it was a story about a future dystopia that could be coming. Is it more relevant today than it was then, or
well,
what's the
if you
message?
think about it, it was 1979. You were probably about 3.
I was 9. Yeah.
You see?
But I love the album. I mean, I grew up listening to
you.
it.
Take this boy out of here.
I wasn't born.
Right. It would take her away as well.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it's very interesting that some of the imagery from the wall is the only thing that the Anti-Defamation League or any of the rest of them have tried to pin on me and have sort of vaguely succeeded. And that is the Star of David on the pig that somebody filmed at a wall show outdoors in Belgium in 2011 or something like that. Or whatever. But let's talk, well, and I explain obviously that pig came out in the part of the show where because of all the difficult things from my childhood and so on, have turned into a fascist demagogue. Mm-hmm. And I play that on stage in a black leather coat with an armband, which is crossed hammers, which might just as well be a swastika. It's quite obvious what I'm talking about, fascism. But I'm talking about, and the pig was part of that bit of the show. It floated over the audience, and it was malevolent. And it was covered in symbols. The Star of David was only one of them. There's also a crucifix, a McDonald's sign, dollar signs, obviously. I can't remember now, but there were about 20 different things. They, of course, zeroed in on this. Anyway, I think at the time, I eventually thought this is more trouble than it's worth and removed it. It's not central. This show isn't about Israel. This show isn't about Zionism. This show is about extremism. Is this show partly about fascism? Yeah, it is. Is Israel an apartheid country? Yeah, it is. Is it bordering on fascist? Yeah, it is. But is it worth all of this? No, it's not. I still in the movie that I made from the thing, there was still I think there were Stars of David falling out of bombers. So to answer your question, is it nodding at Orwell and Huxley, looking forward to a dystopia that hasn't happened yet? Yeah, it is. But it's also looking back to Weimar Germany. It's looking back to 1933. It's looking back to the democratic election of the Führer, which, let's not forget, was part of the very first few pieces of that jigsaw puzzle. And we know where that ended up. Mm. So the wall covers myriad issues, and a lot of them are just personal, sort of 29-year-old man trying to transcend his frightened and scary childhood. And to
problems you had in school and that sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Exactly. Which is something that we all have to do. Not all of us are lucky enough to have the luxury of being able to write pop songs about it. Mm. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, interestingly enough, the last record I made, Is This the Life We Really Want, is in many ways more direct. And I'm working on bits of songs from that. In fact, the title track from that, I've been working on the visuals of it for the new show just this last week.
Oh, wow. When are you going out on tour?
Well, that's a bit of a secret, the actual date, but it's sometime next fall, next autumn. Oh, great. This tour is called This Is Not a Drill. It's like the last few tours I've done. It will be thematic, conceptual, blah, 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 but it will have old Pink Floyd songs in it. When I say old Pink Floyd songs, I mean my songs from when I was in Pink Floyd. So, because there's often some confusion about all of that. But luckily now there are whole new generations growing up who've never heard of Pink Floyd. which is a very good thing.
Who are being reintroduced to your music. That's got to be cool. Right?
Well, they are. Yeah, it is cool. It is cool. I love the fact that when I was on the road with Us and Them up until a couple of years ago, the demographics of the audience were quite extraordinary. They had an average age of 24 or something. They were nearly all young people. Then a few of my generation, and then a lot of my children's generation, but mainly young people who got it, copped it, and got, I want to go and see what that's all about. I've heard about it. Now I want to go and see, which is cool. You know, what is going to happen? Isn't it fascinating and disgusting that we sort of don't know? The picture may become somewhat clearer now Trump's gone, because the fact that US policy was being dictated by that skinny prick Kushner and the awful daughter, and they were swanning around on US One or whatever, making foreign policy for Palestinians. I mean, it's disgusting. It's a huge joke, but it's a really, really disgusting joke. Will Joe Biden, is Joe Biden, who stands there and says, I'm the biggest, you know, supporter of that Israel has ever had, you know, mean that there's any, will he move the embassy back to Tel Aviv? Will he stop giving them 10 billion, bucks a year, or 3 billion it is, $3 billion a year in military aid? Probably not. He'll probably give them more just to show what a good chap he is. But I don't think the world will stand for it. They won't stand for it. And if it becomes a single state, the world will not stand for it being a declared, very pleased with itself, patting itself on the back, apartheid state with no freedom, no sense of freedom, unless you're Jewish, but not for anybody else, and not for any of the indigenous people. They've tried to pretend that the indigenous people didn't exist. Golda Meir was that, back in the 50s and 60s, this was their angle. There aren't any people here. Nobody lived here. Oh, really? Tell that to the 800,000 who left in 1948 and to the 2 or 3 million who are still there.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's one of their biggest historians, Benny Morris, who was critical of, he was one of the new Zionist historians, and then he kind of flipped positions and wants Israel to invade, to drop bombs on Iran. But he wrote this book, 1948, which documents ethnic cleansing, what he called ethnic cleansing. And now he's all gung ho for Israel. And they're like, how can you say that when you're the one who documented ethnic cleansing? He's like, it was ethnic cleansing. And if we'd done more, it wouldn't be a problem today, which is just
Great accent, by the way.
Thank you.
I couldn't get away with that.
It's one of the perks. One of the perks.
Cutting my balls off if I did that.
Yeah. Double perks for me. No balls and happen to be Jewish. So double bonus. Yeah. But it's just funny because that's, here in the United States, I think people are much more successful at pretending that there were no people there. But there, it's kind of like the issue is just like, oh, they were there, but they didn't belong there, or they all wanted to go, or it's interesting how they have to try to struggle with the reconciling history and facts on the ground with ideology.
Well, that battle is true all over the world. I am now part of it locally here. In Southampton, New York. Southampton, New York, guys. Okay, there is a war about to start with New York State judiciary because they will not accept the fact that they lost their court case to try and get the Shinnecock Nation to be quiet, shut up, and do their bidding and do as they're told. These are a proud and wonderful people, and they are sovereign on their land, and they cannot be told what to do. And more than that, the world, maybe not the East End of Long Island, but the world is waking up to the enormous emotional, mental health, even chaos in our societies because of the way the English, the French, the Germans, the Dutch, the Belgians, and all the other settler colonial nations treated all the indigenous people wherever they went, anywhere in the world. and just slaughtered them, as many as they could, and told the rest to be quiet or we'll slaughter you too. And it's only just in the very last few years that some people, some of us white settler colonialists are beginning to wake up and go, wow, I can't believe we did that. But we did, and it was disgusting. And we're still doing it. It's happening all over the world. That's what the money that the Pentagon spends is used for. It's to do that to brown people all over the world. That is what it's for. It's to steal their lithium, their oil, anything mineral under the ground, anything, or to steal their labor. Anywhere there's a sweatshop. That's what it's for. That's what it's for. The American empire is to steal land and resources from brown people who don't live here, and to keep brown people who might like to live here out, separate them from their children and keep them in effing cages at the border. So you just think, you know, you can say, I don't care, I'm a good old boy. Or you can go, you know what, that doesn't make me feel good. I don't feel good about that. In fact, I feel terrible about it. You see what it's doing. It's just heartbreaking. Sorry.
No, it's okay. But the last question that I had was sort of related to that. So when Trump is president, Trump looks like all those things, right? Like he looks like a pig. Yeah. He is personally disgusting. He says terrible things, and he created for a lot of people a kind of political awareness that maybe they didn't have before because they were motivated to get rid of him. But how worried are you that maybe now that he's gone, that people aren't going to pay attention to the awful things that happen kind of beneath the surface? You know, now that there's no longer this horrific figure in public.
And for instance, just to add to that, Michelle Flourney, who's his likely pick for the Pentagon, she herself said when there was consideration of when Israel was proposing unilateral annexation of the West Bank, she said, I would hate to see some in Congress decided they are going to hold hostage our security assistance to Israel as a way of protesting their policies in the West Bank. So that's an example of the kind of Biden, you know, the kind of people we'll see in the Biden administration. They're not going to be born again Christians, Zionists, but they're fine with supporting Israel. Yeah,
well, it's like, what was the woman's name who they put in charge of the CIA, who used to be a concentration camp guard in a black site in bloody Thailand or somewhere?
Haspel.
What was her name, Matt?
Gina Haspel.
Exactly, yeah. When you saw all that going on, you're going, oh my God, what? How is that not hard to believe? Of course they are. Just like this woman. Yeah, of course they're going to put an absolute dyed-in-the-wool murdering swine in that job, because that's who you need. Nobody who wasn't would do the job.
Yeah.
You know, Noam Chomsky said something interesting about Davos a few months ago, and it stuck with me. He said they asked them all at the most recent Davos to list the 19 most important things, you know, blah, 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 blah. And climate change wasn't in the top 19 for any single one of the main executives at Davos. So you can have a chuckle about that and go. And I can't even remember what was the most important thing. But what he did say was that he said, whoever is the CEO of Exxon now, you know, or who was the CEO of Philip Morris during the tobacco things and all of that, they know the science. Because they did it. Exxon actually did a lot of the science, but it was inconvenient at the end of the day. So they all gather in Davos, and all together they go, I know what to do. Let's destroy the world. And they all pat each other on the back and say, bloody good idea. And then they do it. But if you take one of them to one side and go, do you really want it? Don't you have children or grandchildren or anything? Why do you want to destroy the world? They go, and then you realize that they want to destroy the world because they're the CEO of Exxon, and they get $10 million a year for being that, plus their bonuses and this and that and the other. And if they didn't destroy the world, Exxon would find somebody else to do it, and they wouldn't have a job.
Right.
So they're totally ruled by the idea that they have power and a corporate jet and earn a lot of money. No, they're totally ruled by that. And the fact that they have children and grandchildren and that other people do, obviously they don't empathize with others at all. They cannot have a shred of empathy to do it. But also they don't care about their own kids or their own grandchildren. They go, fuck it, we'll destroy the world. We have to make the money. It's weird. And he's right. Davos, Davos, are you serious? Why is that helpful to anybody? That's all them. It's a gathering of them with a few U2 blokes thrown in on the side. The Edge and fucking what's his name as well. But it's not for us. It's not for the people. It's not for any. It's not for any proper reason. It doesn't do any good to anybody. I don't think, anyway.
Sorry, last question. I know I already said that was the last one was the last question, but I saw an interesting answer you gave once. Somebody asked you, like, can music be like a bridge that can help be an equalizer politically? Or I forget what the question was. The person was clearly expecting you to say yes, and you said no. And basically, you said, I don't believe music can be an equalizer or affect politics in the way that the person was saying. But you did say that the music can help you discover empathy, or that it can help people do that. When you look back at your career and the music you're making now, what are you most proud of? What do you think music does for people? Like, what's the best thing about it?
Well, that's a very, it's a broad question, and so there's a million answers, I think, to that question, because it only works specifically if you were to say to me, what do you think about this particular song and what it might have done? Because immediately when I think about music, it's so broad, because if you, even talking about a song, you might be talking about the melody or the arrangement or the structure or the production of a record, or you might be talking about the ideas that are expressed in the lyrics, whether it's poetic, whether it means anything, or political, or whether it stirs you in some way. It doesn't. I'm reminded of a poem that I wrote. I sent to Cormac McCarthy, the great American novelist. When I read All the Pretty Horses for the first time, when I'd finished it, I was so stunned by that book, by the writing, but also content and everything about it. I wrote this. I sent it to him. He never replied, but I sent it. There is a magic in some books that sucks a man into connections with the spirits hard to touch, that join him to his kind. A man will eke the reading out, guarded like a canteen in the desert heat. And sometimes needs must drink, and then the final drop falls sweet, the last page turns, the end. Well, that shows that I have an attachment to what literature can do for me under certain circumstances. That is also true of songs. So when I listen to Ray Charles singing Georgia on My Mind when I'm 15 years old, drinking a cup of tea at 2:00 in the morning in Cherry Hinton Road in Cambridge, and like that feeling that we know of being moved by something, and in that case, a piece of music. I remember saying, that 15-year-old said to himself, if I could ever write anything that moved anybody a millionth as much as this moves me now, I would consider my work done. Not that I was even thinking then that I might become a songwriter someday. But so, yeah, of course, it's hugely important. And there are those transcendental moments. And it doesn't have to be that. It can be the Adagio from Mahler's Fourth Symphony. Every time you hear that, you go, yeah, it still gets me. I used to play that before gigs, Mahler's Fourth Symphony, because it's like, and so thank God for Puccini and Mahler and the Romantics, which is where my great loves lie, but also for John Prine, who I miss desperately, and but for the humanity of his work, it's the humanity of his work, the laying out of the great human being that he is still. To share that with us, not just to illuminate our lives, but to help us get through tomorrow as well. To keep fighting.
One, just to clarify, I'm sorry if I didn't make it clear, but before, when Matt, you asked about Trump, I and how we're going to survive post-Trump, or how we're going to be able to be as vigilant, right? Because I brought up Michelle Flourney because, you know, she's an example of basically the same bad policies, but a little bit, but without the as inflammatory rhetoric, which is how I see Biden, like writ large. So I'm wondering if you have any ideas about how we can make sure to not, like, you know, just all go out and have brunch or go back to quote unquote normal when we have Biden in office. And then I had a question about your father. And, you know, it's so interesting that he was a pacifist, right? And then he had a change of heart and fought in the war and was killed. How has that shaped, I mean, this is a huge question, but how has that shaped your view of nonviolence and violence? And has that view of that changed over time?
No, I don't think so. His story, and the fact that I know it because it was told to me by my mother, obviously been hugely influential and probably quite difficult as well, looking back on it, because the act of a devout Christian, conscientious objector who goes through the extreme bravery of standing in front of the conscription board and saying, I can't kill people, and then driving an ambulance, and then changing his mind because he's become a communist and going back and saying, changed my mind, and being, you know, conscripted and then officer training and then bang, dead. It's so heroic that it's a hard thing for a child to grow up with. There's some great stuff about this in Blood Meridian, which is another of Cormac McCarthy's great novels. It's a fantastic bit about this, but I won't go into that, or we'll be here all day. What was the other part? So there's that. I've been working on Is This the Life, which is a song of mine, and there's lines in it that I've been working on for the last couple of weeks on visuals for them. And the very end of the thing goes, so every time the curtain falls on some forgotten foreign life, it is because we all stood by, silent and indifferent. It's normal.
Wow.
Yeah. So that is an appropriate piece of my writing on a record that I made in 2015. So it's already 5 years old. Things drift into the past very, very quickly and easily. And I'm going to tell my mum's story before we finish, because having spoken about my dad, when I was 13, I think, my mum one day, she said to me, we were talking about something that I was having a problem figuring out. And she said, Roger, as you grow up and through your life, you're often going to come across things where you have to make decisions about things and which may be complex, political things and other things, emotional, all kinds of different things. And when you do, and you find yourself wrestling with something, if you take my advice, you will look at it from all sides, listen to all possible opinions on it, do as much research as you can until you're really au fait with the subject, really feel you've got a grasp of it. After that, your work is done. All the hard work is done. The next bit is easy. You just do the right thing.
Wow.
Yeah, wow. Thanks, Mum. I mean, I'm joking. She's been dead for 10 years, my mum, but what an amazing gift to give an adolescent, because you can't get rid of it. I lived the rest of my life and have done probably since that moment, though it only really sunk in maybe 20 years later after that. Of what is the right, because there's always a right thing, always. A right thing to do. How do you figure it out? That's a trick.
It's great stuff.
But if we can get more of us to do the right thing, then we're home free. We'll start looking after one another. we'll start and we'll begin to have something that might be called a community, because that's what community is. It's looking after the most vulnerable of us, really properly looking after them. And for that, you need to stop spending all my tax dollars on nuclear weapons.
We'll try to get that changed.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks, all right, and keep practicing the drums.
Yeah.
I will. I'm terrible. So, but they're fun. So that's the important thing. Thank you so much. It's been such an honor.
Yeah. Yes, thank you so much. This is great.
I love this blog thing that if it's called a blog, that you do webinars stuff, and many others that I watch because I follow you, and Aaron Mate and my friends at Grey Zone and blah 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 blah, and all of those. But because you are the future of where. How do we get the grounding that we need to decide to do the right thing? That's why what you do is so valuable.
Wow. Oh, don't tell anyone with that.
You ain't going to get it from Fox News or CNN.
Yeah.
Probably not. No.
Right.
Excellent. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much. This
Appreciate
is so great.
it. And good luck with going on tour.
Again.
Yes.
All right. Absolutely.
Yes, definitely.
All right. Take care now.
Cheers, guys.
That was amazing.
It was super interesting.
What's so cool about him is he really takes, there's so many celebrities that, music aside, there's so many celebrities who join these kind of milquetoast causes or champions that general, loves Trump's hate, whatever. But he's just in there with all the bravest takes, positions, and all over Israel, Venezuela, he's up on everything.
So I grew up listening to his records, and he's clearly got he's got a part of his personality clearly that's very sentimental and poetic. If you listen to songs like "Wish You Were Here" or "Shine On You, Crazy Diamond," whatever. But then there's other stuff that's just angry, and it's not performative angry. It's angry.
Yeah.
And it clearly comes from a real place, and that you can tell, that talking to him, I never talked to him before, that it's not put on, it's not an act.
Yeah.
So really, really interesting. Very cool stuff. I'm gonna go watch the Bob Geldof version of The Wall now.
Yeah.
But anyway, great stuff. We'll get together again next week, and we'll review more shows that we didn't watch.
Yeah, that's one of the things. Yeah. And everyone should follow him on Twitter at Roger Waters. Just Roger Waters is his name, and his Twitter handle, and his website, rogerwaters.com. But seriously, it's a great action alert. You'll see all these great causes that he's talking about.
All right, cool. Thanks for tuning in and listening, and rate and review us. Do not patronize the evil others. And
we're otherizing Pod Save America, and that's fine.
Yeah. And thanks again. We'll see you next week.
Great.